Hello, my name is Iwo Borkowicz and this is my master dissertation project. In 2015, I won a scholarship from Vlir-ous to travel to Cuba and conduct a research there in a cooperation with Polytechnic Antonio Echeverria in Havana. Cuba is a country of 11 million people that officially lacks 500,000 housing units, with outside sources suggesting that this number might be as high as 1 million. This would make 1/3 of this population homeless. Cuba is a communistic regime, so nobody is per se homeless. People are just pushed into already overcrowded houses, creating a very dramatic and unhealthy density, with up to 8 people sharing one bedroom. One might recognize Havana from a picture on the right, but if you know this city a bit better, you see it as a living ruin. All districts of Havana struggle with deterioration, but one in particular, Havana Vieja, the Old Town. In a statistic made by a municipality, 50% of its buildings are considered in bad condition. In our language, those buildings would be simply named ruins. This is Havana Vieja. It is the densest district in the whole country, and it faces the highest risk of the negative impact of gentrification due to the huge and still growing touristic demand. Cuba is a very poor country. In the 1950s it was as rich as Italy, but today an average monthly salary is just $20. In 2010, Cuban government was forced to introduce the private sector of Cuban economy in order to repair it. Since then, 500,000 Cubans moved into self-employment, creating a new and a very important part of Cuba's future. Private businesses are highly restricted and very modest in size, but this sector, in my opinion, needs to be looked after and stimulated. In recent years, Cuba is changing. In 2015, first internet hotspots were created, diplomatic progress was made on the line between Cuba and US, and after 50 years of restrictions, American tourists will be able to travel to the island easier. Cuba is in a very dynamic moment right now. Already in 1997, tourism became the biggest part of Cuba's economy. In 2015, over 3 million tourists visited the island. Prior to the revolution, 90% of tourists were from America. Nowadays, it's just 5%. So with the recent changes, these 3 millions that visited the island in 2015, in my opinion, might double in a couple of years. Touristic demand, as any other product, has its dynamics. Cuba is a new product on a touristic market. If one was to imagine Cubans building enough hotels to satisfy the demand in a peak point, after 30, 50 or 70 years, a big part of these hotels would become obsolete. Cuba is struggling with its housing shortage for many years, but what is even more alarming is that in the last 10 years, Cuba is building less and less housing. And with quite common building collapses, especially in a capital city, the shortage grows. I want to address this issue with a new typology. I think one could imagine buildings in areas attracting tourists that would consist of both social housing for Cubans and a proportionate number of hotel units weaved into them. These hotel units would generate money that would make possible paying off the loan that was taken for the construction of the building itself. Cuban tenants would become hosts and make steady income by taking care for the guests. It also goes along the political reality on the island. The revolutionary government prefers everybody to get a little instead of one group getting a lot. This type of guest houses already work in Cuba. They are called casa particular. As the country couldn't cope with the growing touristic demand in 2004, they passed a law that allowed Cubans to rent rooms in their houses for guests. And I think it works very, very well. What is the most important is that it changes the relation between a Cuban and the tourists from a hotel guest and a mate to a host and its guests. And I think it's beneficial for both sides. But what would happen if we were to satisfy the whole hotel demand in Havana Vieja only with this kind of typology? I do not propose that per se, but I took a liberty to conduct a hypothetical calculation, which outcome looks like this, where in 2015 we would need just one building of housing and hotel units weaved into it for a city block in the center of Havana. But is there enough space for the hotel units and the necessary additional housing in Havana Vieja, that is, as I said, the densest district in the whole country? Because there is so many empty plots after collapsed buildings, and so many buildings are just 1 or 2 story high, often due to partial collapses, the calculations show that if Havana was to achieve the average height of 4 floors, we would generate 3 times more space than actually needed now. So there is clearly space for the hotel units to be weaved in to housing, and there is space for both of them. This led me to set a basic building block proportion of 70 square meters of housing, 20 meters of guest room, and 10 meters of circulation that I would use in all the proposals that I design. With only $50 per night in a historic center of Havana and just 50% of the nights booked, 80% of the income would go to paying off the loan that was the reason why the construction was possible in the first place. 10 would consist of salaries for Cubans that would give them 4 times more money than the average salary right now, and the last 10% would be granted for the operational costs. And if we agree that $1,000 per square meter is a reasonable budget to build in Cuba, where workforce is very cheap, the building will pay itself off in just 7 years, adding loan interest and unexpected costs. And I think it's fair to say that this kind of typology can pay itself off in under 10 years. Havana is already working with a system where they take money generated by tourism and pump it into, for example, schools, elderly homes, hospitals, and also some housing. I consider this to be a very good tactic, and I treat my proposal as a contribution to it. Problems that this country is facing are great in scale, and there is a clear need of many ideas and solutions working together. My proposal is very different from what Havana is doing right now in a time frame aspect of its execution, and due to the fact that the next 20 years, in my opinion, will shape Cuba's future, makes even more important that its inhabitants will at least live in humane conditions with healthy density housing, steadily growing income, and a possibility of growing their businesses in order to successfully face many challenges that they will be confronted with. I want this idea to work as a housing cooperative, basing it on already existing culture of cooperatives on the island. But how would it emerge? Municipality has a very long list of people awaiting for housing. Based on that list, they can specify the area that needs it the most and decide which plots are suitable for that idea. Later, each plot is assigned to an architect who designs the basic structure of the building, the front facade, placement of the patios, circulation, and technical shafts. Based on this project, social workers can calculate how many families will this building house and create a housing cooperative of the future tenants. Next, those future tenants join the architect in the design process, where every tenant gets a space in a building and designs the plan of his or her apartment with the architect as an advisor, not the decision maker. Afterwards, in order to grant quality and efficiency, the construction company will be hired, and it will be responsible for executing all the things designed by an architect: the main structure, placement of the patios, circulation, technical shafts, and the front facade. Tenants will be responsible for executing their apartments themselves and the corresponding number of hotel units. Each tenant will be given a portion of a loan to do so. It is very hard to find money to build in Cuba, but I not only want to think how to get it, but how to spend it. As I said, the emerging small self-employed sector of Cuba's economy needs stimulation, and by shifting a part of responsibility to tenants, we not only connect them to the project sooner and give them the chance to answer to their specific individual needs, but also we make them hire people in order to execute their flats. Self-employed tilers, plumbers, and electricians will get access to the money, creating a trickle-down effect that will empower and supply the small private economy. And I think this is very important. After the building is finished, tenants move in and the paying of the loan starts. To test this idea, I positioned 5 prototypes in the south part of the old town, as this area is given little attention from the municipality and no investments are planned there in the near future. This area is also very rich in urban gaps after collapsed buildings. Actually, all Havana Vieja is, and I am addressing exactly these kind of plots with my prototypes. Each prototype is representing a different size of a plot in a different urban setting in order to check this idea spatially. All of them are designed along these principles and guidelines. First of all, to address the changing dynamics of the touristic demand, hotel units are designed in such a way that they are very easily transformable into new housing or can be easily incorporated into existing housing, giving tenants a possibility of expanding their apartments after the loan is paid off. 20% of the plot is to be open air to grant sufficient ventilation. A research about that conducted in Havana Vieja suggested minimum of 15%, and I want to be a little bit more generous knowing how hot Cuban summer is. To enhance the ventilation, all the patios are also connected in the ground floor. Ground floor and the roof terrace becomes a collective space. Small businesses and street sellers are addressed with a dedicated space and benches in the front of the ground floor. Street sellers are very common in Havana and there is absolutely no specified infrastructure for them. I want to address that also. We also get an interesting duality of the facades where the front facade, designed by an architect, is placed next to the inner emergent facade, which is an outcome of the co-design process with the future tenants. I want these buildings also to promote Cuban handcraft because Cubans are very proud of it, passive cooling methods, and all the possible elements should be designed as open work elements to maximize the airflow. Now I will present an example of one of these 5 prototypes I designed. For this plot, in my opinion, a good flexible structure plan could be designed around 4 open air areas and look like this. I want those buildings to create a relation between an open common ground floor and a street through the business zone situated in between them. In the evening, this zone can become a social area and the benches for street sellers can be occupied by Cubans playing domino on a street side, as they usually do in the evening. Open common ground floor also houses a common kitchen and a place where tourists can eat their breakfast or supper, and tenants can organize bigger gatherings like birthday celebrations or watch sport events together. Designed flats are social housing standards, so they are not overly generous. So the ground floor and a roof terrace is to be each flat extension, where one has a possibility of housing larger social gatherings or just spend times with other tenants. I designed all the prototypes to be 3 or 4 floors high. Despite that, every prototype comes with 6 to 8 possible plans, with different flat sizes and space arrangements. As I said, the last word about the flat layout will be in hands of the future tenant. So architect's role is to grant a maximum variety and flexibility for the building to be able to house various sizes and types of families. For example, one could imagine a plan with 2 flats and 2 hotel units in the middle. They could later be transformed into a 3rd flat or incorporated into existing flats, giving them possibility of growth with different spatial setups. We could also have 4 hotel units and 1 apartment if needed. At the end, what is the most important is that each building with its flexibility is also maintaining the set proportion between flats and hotel units in order to pay off the loan in up to 10 years. On the roof, I also propose some urban gardening zone, cherishing this phenomenon deeply rooted in Havana's history, as well as some common laundry area and leisure zone. All the buildings are designed using cheap and simple technologies and materials that Cubans are just familiar with. I think each building needs to be individually designed by an architect. What I propose is a socio-economical system, not a formal one. I think new infills in the fabric of the old town should deeply respect this extraordinary context, blend in and create beautiful architectural quality with the use of noble proportions, honest usage of materials, and Cuban ornamental handcraft. This one, for example, plays with a proportion of exposed and unexposed brickwork, color, and a simple usage of materials, trying to achieve quality with modesty. What would be the color of that facade? This is for the housing cooperative to decide. Cubans use color with a great playfulness, and I want to cherish that. For example, the building on the right-hand side of the street 2 weeks later became blue. Low quality paint and a strong sun leads to Havana changing its colors very dynamically. Due to the time limitation, I will not go through all the 5 prototypes in this presentation, but all of them follow the same principle and guidelines, giving a different spatial outcomes due to the different plots and urban settings around them. Instead, now, I will move to a sketch of a follow-up second intervention that, in my opinion, should be the next step for Havana Viejas. After granting people with housing and access to steady income, the next goal for this district is an infrastructure for a non-touristical economy to prosper. Non-touristic economy nowadays is almost non-existent in Havana Vieja. Only businesses addressing tourists are capable of paying high rent prices of the business premises. The gap between the money that tourist is willing to pay for a service or a product and what Cuban is capable of is just very, very wide. The inner non-touristic economy is needed in Havana Vieja as in any other place for this district to be a place not only to visit but also to live in. One possibility I see is again based on a culture of cooperatives. Since this year, Cubans will be able to join in groups of self-employees and create non-agro private business cooperatives. If many small businesses would join and pitch in, they might be able to afford building a simple kind of co-working space for them. I took a liberty to propose how such a building could look and work. It's a very simple open-plan building with the ground floor having multiple accesses from the street so that businesses could expose and promote their products and services. Workspaces and meeting rooms are placed above. All the technical elements as well as sanitary and a kitchen are placed in the volume of the central staircase that is covered with the Cuban ornamental tiles. Above the staircase, an open space grants ventilation and is equipped with a simple evaporative cooling system. I want this building to be simple and modest. A building that deals with space and materials in a conscious way without generating unnecessary costs, but at the same time gratifying its function with a certain humane quality. To summarize, I do not think that these are the answers. Cuba is facing problems of great magnitude, and in order to face them, many programs, ideas, projects need to act together in harmony. I believe that this kind of projects in Cuba's political, economical, and social reality could work very well and contribute to the greater country-wide initiative in creating resilient and sustainable Cuba. Cubans want their country to finally open up, and it needs to be done in a way that will not leave its people unprepared and defenseless against the world that in many areas went ahead of Cuba in the last 50 years of its separation. I hope humane housing conditions, steady income, and a possibility of growing their self-employed sector will give Cubans strength that they will need in the near future. Thank you.